when we think of, regular drugs, be they legal or illegal, when we think of drugs like alcohol or cocaine or something like that, no one in their right mind would ever say, I need alcohol, or alcohol saves my life, or I need cocaine. We wouldn't take anybody seriously if they said that. But many people do say, I need my Klonopin. I need my Xanax. I need my psychiatric drugs. And I've even seen, I've looked at many of your tweets and some of the comments that come. I wanted to kind of get a sense of what you're dealing with in terms of like pushback and things like that. And indeed, I saw in many cases people say like pushing back on, I think in one of your tweets, you said something to the effect of, in some cases, doing nothing may have been better than the drug prescription. And then I saw a response to that, which was a person who was very offended and stated that the drugs saved their life. So this is common, that the drugs saved their life and that they need to be on these drugs. And I think many people, I find it's often especially common with people dealing with bipolar disorder, that not only them, but their family especially has this belief that they absolutely need to be on this drug and that the thought of coming off of it is just irrational. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this widespread belief that some people literally need to be on these drugs.
I'm going to give a complicated answer for that because I think about this carefully, and I mean the first thing that I want to say is I get it. Like, I mean, if you've gone off these meds before and you became manic and you ended up in the hospital and you just lost 6 months of your life with instability, you wouldn't want to do that again. You might have nearly killed yourself. You might have financially ruined yourself. That it's so traumatic, and I get that you would just be like, okay, I'm just going to stay on. So I empathize with that. The other thing that I think about is that this is a complicated issue, and I think about what these drugs do long term, and I think that there are variations of what they can do. So most drugs lead to tolerance over time through a process called homeostasis. Our body pushes against them, and actually, let me take a step back. The step back from this is it possible that these drugs are actually helpful for some people? And I think it definitely is. You can get on an antidepressant, and let's say your baseline, for whatever reason, is highly anxious to the point that you're crippled and you can't do anything because of the anxiety, and you get on a drug, and that drug turns it down a level and your level of functioning improves. Did that drug help that person? Sure. That's great. And that's a wonderful thing. But what happens long term? And here's where I think, okay, that there could be possibilities. You can have a partial adaptation to it. So, the homeostatic mechanisms kind of kick in, and it sort of, you just find a nice balance. And for whatever reason, you're sort of lucky, and that drug effect is stable for you for several years or even decades. And you enjoy that effect of that drug, and it's just helping you. And I think that's a fine thing. And if you were to say to me, I really need this drug to function, and it's just working for me, and it's great, that's okay. But you also have to hold the fact that there's a lot of people out there where the drug effect completely goes away, and they just need higher and higher doses. I don't know why some people completely become tolerant to the drug and they need higher and higher doses, or gradually over time, some people become paradoxical to them and the drugs start to harm them. And that's the scary thing about psychiatric meds is, I'd work with a lot of people and these drugs worked for, years to decades, and it just turned on them. And so having to take long-term psychiatric drugs is kind of scary because, at least from my perspective, I don't know when, is it going to stop working eventually? Are they going to have problems? So when I hear these comments, I mean, I don't know what's going on with that individual person, but I still try and hold space for the fact that, is it possible that a drug effect could have a beneficial impact on someone's life? And, they have ruled out all other problems and they're not over adapting to it. And it's just working for them. Yeah, I think that's possible. And I think that's a great thing for that person if it's working for them. Um, but it still doesn't get rid of the problem, which is we don't even know who those people are, and we put a lot of people on them and we sell them certainty and that it's going to be a great thing long term. And a lot of people get harmed. I don't know if that was helpful. That's kind of how I kind of think about those issues.
I think that's a very sound
Yeah.
answer. Um, and I mean, I agree, and I often find myself saying, especially when I'm talking about these issues, maybe like in a lecture hall or something like that, I find myself really clarifying. I'm not generally against chemical support. I think that there's a place for chemical support. But I just think it's very important to emphasize that when we're talking about that case you described of a person for whom it's really indeed helping, like it's curbing their anxiety just enough to where they can function better. I think, yeah, you're right that there are definitely cases like that. And I just think that the right way to frame it is in the same way that we would talk about a person who's able to drink a couple glasses of wine 3 or 4 nights a week and really be benefited by that, really like relax and chill and just stop worrying so much, that type of thing. So I think as long as, in my opinion, we are framing that as just like alcohol or cannabis or other substances, then that's kind of the right way to think of it. And indeed, cannabis and alcohol can be extremely helpful for people, and many people are able to keep it in moderation and not let tolerance grow too strong and not let it get out of control. And it's just a net positive effect in their life. So I'm with you. I think that that's a very sound answer. And I think if people are just framing it the right way, which is not that this is like correcting a chemical imbalance in my brain, but rather that this is inducing a pharmacological effect that I find to be very helpful, then that's the right approach.
And if you're listening without the video, I'm kind of nodding along to what Nick is saying now, and I just want to add something. One of the biggest problems that I have is we don't really give people informed consent, because I think a lot of the times, like that situation that I described would be okay if you did things correctly. So someone comes in with depression, you actually spend the time to get to know them. You actually go, okay, well, tell me about your relationships, tell me about your work, let me understand your life. Because ideally, the solution is that you try non-drug treatments first, because that's going to be much safer than getting someone kind of hooked on a drug long-term that you can't predict what it's going to do, a couple of years down the line. You simply cannot. And so we often don't do that at all. People come in and we say you've got depression or bipolar, so we just put them on a drug straight away without even running the appropriate protocols to do everything to divert using this drug that's potentially going to be unpredictable in the long term. And that's, I mean, that's a disaster. And this one case where I bring up where it's just like, if there was a person and they ran all those things and they tried to fix it in every other way that they could, and the system was working correctly, and then, they did end up on a drug and it helped them, that's great. But the fraction of people that I meet where that was actually their story is like zero, because I don't really see most people, at least in traditional mental health settings, getting, finding doctors who are really trying to help them with non-drug therapies that might actually get to the root cause of their problems. Because most of mental health, I think, it's understandable in the context of people's lives. It's very rare to find someone that I just go, this doesn't make sense at all.
Right. That's a great point. And I think in those cases, most likely that's when there actually is a biological cause in place. And I think that is like, although everything I just said about sometimes these drugs, if you think of them like cannabis or alcohol, can have a place in a person's life, like I do stand behind what I said, but I also acknowledge that I don't think that drinking wine 3 or 4 times a week or every single night is the ideal thing for a person to do. And I wouldn't judge it, and I understand it. But if there is anxiety or depression, then there's a cause to it, and it's crucial to understand that cause. And sometimes, like, in psychology, we often think of the three big buckets of contributing factors to anyone's behavior or emotional states, and those are the psychological, the biological, and the environmental, which are all intertwined but also distinct. And sometimes there are psychological issues like unresolved trauma, for example, or maladaptive belief systems. And then there are environmental causes like, sick societies and abusive households and bullying at school and things like that. And if the cause is in one of those buckets, the solution needs to come from that same bucket, and so I think that is the danger when we have people who are not being harmed by the drugs, and so they continue taking them, whether we're talking about alcohol or prescribed drugs. But ultimately, like you're saying, the underlying issue is never exposed or addressed, and that's what really needs to happen. Like I think of one of my sort of versions of a dystopian world is a world where everyone is walking around almost drunkenly happy while the world is burning and everything is horrible and the environment is deteriorating and everything's ugly and there's no art and there's no human connection, but everyone's on some type of drug that's inducing this state of euphoria. That would be a worse dystopia than everyone being miserable while the world is burning, because if everyone's miserable, that's an appropriate reaction.
Mm. Yeah, there's the whole line of I don't, I swear I've read this somewhere, or maybe it's just me thinking to myself, but it's sometimes it doesn't really feel like we're that far from where we are, and if you wanted to be like, put your tinfoil hat on, and you could make some decent cases that in some ways psychiatry is kind of pushing us there, because it's a lot easier to say, well, this person has a major depressive disorder, then actually, like, our state and our society is sick, and the way we treat people is not good. And, the way we've structured our work and our families and all of these things, which is kind of going around business and the strong capitalist culture here, which has its benefits, but also has tremendous harms. Sometimes it's a lot easier to say that all the mental illness is on the rise rather than kind of, look at these other things. And
exactly.
Yeah.